Land. In recent years, there's been growing concern both inside the country and around the world. Are South African farmers being kicked out of their land? If so, why? To understand what's happening today, we need to rewind time, back over a century, to a policy that changed millions of lives. The struggle over land in South Africa is not new. It's deeply tied to colonialism and apartheid, systems that systematically excluded Black South Africans from land ownership for generations. In 1913, the South African government passed the Natives' Land Act, a law that reserved nearly 90% of land for white South Africans, who made up less than 10% of the population. Black South Africans, the vast majority, were confined to crowded reserves, denied property rights, and pushed off ancestral land. This injustice continued through apartheid and created one of the most unequal land distributions in the world. When apartheid ended in 1994, the African National Congress, ANC government, led by Nelson Mandela, pledged to right this wrong. The promise? Land reform. The vision was to transfer land to Black South Africans, not through violence or chaos, but through a legal, structured, and just process. 3 pillars were put in place. Restitution, returning land to individuals or communities dispossessed after 1913. Redistribution, making land accessible to those excluded by past laws. Tenure reform, securing land rights for people living without legal title. The goal was to transfer 30% of farmland to Black ownership by the early 2000s. But decades later, less than 10% has changed hands. Frustration began to boil over. For millions of Black South Africans, land reform wasn't just slow, it was failing. Many blamed bureaucratic delays, corruption, and a lack of political will. By the 2010s, protests increased. So did political pressure. In 2018, the South African Parliament, led by the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, and supported by elements of the ANC, passed a motion to explore land expropriation without compensation. This meant the government could seize land, especially unused or underutilized land, and redistribute it without paying the current owner. To some, it was justice long overdue. To others, especially white farmers, it felt like a warning shot. Since then, fear has grown among many white South African farmers. Some say they've been pressured off their land by community takeovers or legal battles. Others have left the country entirely, citing instability, government threats, or targeted farm attacks. Violent crimes in rural areas that, while often not politically motivated, add to the sense of vulnerability. It's important to note, South Africa has not legalized mass land seizures, but the debate alone has created uncertainty. And for some, the feeling of being kicked out is emotional, even if it's not yet legal or physical. Meanwhile, for millions of South Africans living in poverty, the lack of land is more than a historical injustice. It's a daily reality. Many live in crowded townships or informal settlements. Others are forced to rent land they've lived on for generations. To them, land reform is not about revenge. It's about dignity, survival, and a future. As of today, expropriation without compensation is not law. The government is still debating how, or if, to implement it. Most land transfers still happen through the willing seller, willing buyer model. Some programs have helped communities reclaim land, but others have failed due to lack of support, training, or resources. The truth is, land reform in South Africa is slow, complicated, and deeply political. And farmers aren't being mass evicted, but some are leaving, either out of fear or frustration. International media has amplified the issue, with some calling it land grabs or even reverse racism. Governments in countries like the United States and Australia have expressed concern about property rights and violence. But others argue that South Africa's challenge is not about race. It's about correcting an unjust system without collapsing the economy. So what's the solution? That's the question South Africa is still trying to answer. Land reform must be fair, legal, and sustainable. But it must also be fast enough to address the legacy of apartheid. The future may lie in partnerships between existing farmers and new landowners, in support, education, and investment, not chaos. Because in the end, land is more than a resource. It's identity, heritage, and hope. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What do you think is the right way to approach land reform in South Africa? Let's have the conversation, with facts, empathy, and a willingness to listen.